everybody. Welcome to Creating and Using Custom Brushes. This YouTube class is presented by Studio 300 at Fountaindale Public Library, and in it I'm going to take you through how you can make your own custom brushes inside Photoshop, and then how you can import those brushes into mobile drawing apps like Procreate and Adobe Fresco, so you can use the custom brushes that you made across platforms. We're also going to be going over how to make brushes in Adobe Illustrator and create vector brushes from that. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. I have Photoshop open in front of me right now, and I'm using a document that is 5,000 pixels square. That's the largest brush size that you can make in Adobe CC right now. But before we get started building brushes, just some basic information to help you kind of understand how brushes in Photoshop work, so that when we go through changing different brush settings, you have an idea of what those settings are actually doing, what those different adjustments are doing. So a brush, if I just draw, I have a Wacom tablet hooked up to my laptop here. If I just draw with my pen and tablet, you get the illusion that I'm drawing a line. Actually, what Photoshop is doing is a brush is just a shape that's acting kind of like a stamp. So if I enlarge this, this is a hard round brush. If I just make a mark, the shape of the brush is this circle. And it's just repeating the stamp over and over again in quick succession, distancing things a little bit between each mark so that it creates a line. If I was to mess with the different brush settings, like spacing, you can see how that actually works. So if I go over to brush settings and I hit, where is it? Let's see, shape dynamics. All right, so if I go to brush tip shape and I mess with the spacing here, if I go over to like closer to 100%, a little over that, you can see that the distance between these different stamp marks gets wider. And so if I draw with that now, it creates some space. If I make this a little bit smaller, you can see the kind of spacing effect that it creates. So the whole idea with making custom brushes is that you are making a shape to start with that you can use. Once you make it a brush, it will make a repeating pattern for you. In order to make a brush in Photoshop, you have to have a document that either has a white background or a transparent background. That's because brush information is saved in black and white and grayscale. So if you have a dark mark, if your brush is 100% black, that will create a solid opaque mark. If your brush is gray, it will become transparent. And if it's white, it will be completely clear. So, like I said before, the largest canvas that you can make a brush with is 5,000 by 5,000 pixels. That's usually more than enough space than you need. So what you're doing when you're creating a brush is you're creating a shape or silhouette that just gets repeated over and over again at some distance apart to create a line. So you can make a brush out of any kind of shape. It doesn't even have to necessarily be like a shape you draw. It can also be different textures. We're going to make a couple different brushes today. So the first way we're going to make a brush is we're actually going to just start by making a circle. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over here and select the ellipse tool, hold down Shift, and draw a big circle. And I'm making this shape as large as I can on the canvas. We're also going to fill it with black. Go ahead and use the paint bucket tool to fill in this shape. We're starting with a circle so that I can show you the different brush settings and how you can change this shape using the brush settings to create the kind of texture brush that you want. So we're going to hit Command D to get rid of those ants. And I could technically make this smaller so that it's not taking up the entire canvas, but that will lead into issues later on that I can show you right now. So if I select this shape and just made it a lot smaller, so that it's only taking up about this much of the canvas, and I wanted to make that into a brush, I go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. I'm going to name this Brush Test. And now I have this brush in the library that I can use to draw. So I can make this brush as big or as small as I want. And going smaller isn't really a problem. If I draw with a smaller version of this brush, the quality is pretty good. The problem is when I try to make a mark. Let me just get rid of this giant circle here. And go back to the brush tool. You can always hit B to go back to the brush tool. So this is the brush that I just made. If I draw small, it's no problem. But if I draw anything really, really large and zoom in on it, I start to get a blur. Whoops. A blur along the edges, which you don't really want. So if I want to stop that from happening, you want to make your brush as large as possible so that when you scale up, you don't lose any quality while you're drawing. So we're going to get rid of that layer. And that's why for this first brush, we're going to make the circle about this size. Okay, so I'm going to make this our new brush preset. Go to Edit again, go to Define Brush Preset, Brush Test 2. Okay, so now we can start playing around with different shape dynamics. I have the brush settings panel open right now. I've also got the brushes panel open. To open up brushes, you can go over to the toolbar and click on this icon right here that says brush tool. You can also hit B as a shortcut to get to it. But if you want to open up brush settings, usually it'll open up right next to brushes. If it doesn't, you can go to Window, and brush settings is right there. So, or you can press F5. That's also a shortcut to get to it. Okay, so the first setting we're going to start with is the brush tip shape. We started off with a regular circle, but you can squash the shape into more of an oval, stretch it out. So if I was just to draw with a regular sort of circle-shaped brush, the result would be kind of more like this. The more you squish it, the more of kind of like a chisel tip line you get, kind of like when you draw with a highlighter. So you can change the shape directly like that. You can also go to Shape Dynamics and make sure that for these different settings, your control is set to pen pressure, because that will give you the most variability. Also, if you want a preview of what your brush will look like, this lower window will show you how the different adjustments change your brush and how it makes marks. So the size jitter, set that back to pen pressure. Size jitter changes the variability in the size of the different sort of stamps that make up your brush line. So how I was explaining earlier about as you draw, the brush is kind of making a bunch of stamps repeatedly. This changes the size of those individual stamps. So if you were to slide this over, you get more of a like organic kind of broken line as you draw, which is nice. It kind of gives you this like ink line. Angle jitter takes those different stamp marks. It doesn't really work if you have a circular brush, but if you have kind of this more oval brush, it changes the angle of those different stamp shapes. We're also using pen pressure for this, so it's just another way to change what the character of your brush stroke looks like. The roundness jitter changes how round or oval those different brush marks are. We'll also set that to pen pressure. So now if I draw with this, it creates more of kind of like a spatter brush. Another setting that you can work with is scattering. So if I draw, going back to this blank page, if I was to draw a line straight across the page like this, all of those different kind of stamp marks are following this one line, not really deviating apart. Scattering sort of spreads those stamps out along the sides of the line. So if I was to turn scattering on, and I'm going to control this by pen pressure as well, and draw this line again, it sort of spreads those circular stamps out. If I zoom in, you can kind of see how it spreads them out. You can also change the count. So if I wanted to really scatter these, and say I don't want one stamp, I want 2 or 3. Control those by pen pressure as well. I want those really spread apart. So now, if I zoom out and draw, make this brush a little bit smaller, it creates like this pattern brush. So this is really nice if you want to experiment with this setting, make things like particle brushes. You can use it for photo editing, but you can also use it for painting if you want to make like a splatter texture or something like that, or a different like pattern border. So after shape dynamics and scattering, the next setting we're going to worry about is the transfer setting. Transfer changes the opacity, kind of like how transparent or opaque the different brush strokes are. So if I was to mess with this dial here, set that to pen pressure. If I use really light pressure, the marks are light, and the more pressure I add, the darker they become. So that kind of gets you started with making a brush from one solid shape. The next thing we are going to do is draw our own brush in this canvas. So we're going to start from scratch completely. I'm going to go back to the brushes menu, click hard round brush, and you can go ahead and use this entire canvas to draw whatever shapes you like. I'm going to just kind of scribble in a little bit of texture. I don't really like how that's going. Turn on shape dynamics here and adjust that to pen pressure so I've got a little bit more variety. But you can just scribble things. I'm going to leave these in different corners. And you don't have to make this whole space full. We don't want to like make a black square because that will be the shape of our brush, and it'll have some really hard edges. You just want to use the space in this canvas, make sure that you're putting marks all through the space. So I kind of like how this is setting up. You can also, if you wanted to make, say, like some kind of dust pattern, click on the lasso tool and use that to draw and fill those shapes. If you want a shortcut for how to fill shapes, you can use G and fill those shapes in. Gonna go back to the lasso tool, draw some more weird little shapes, use G and fill those in again. Okay, so I kind of have the pattern I want. I'm gonna go to and create a brush preset. So go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. I'm going to name this one Scribble Brush. And it's created this brush in the brushes menu, Scribble Brush. If you want to find the brushes that you made, it should just populate them at the bottom of the brushes menu. But I'm going to go ahead and clear this canvas. And now here's my brush shape. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the round brush. I'm going to try drawing some things and see how I like it. So if I just pull it across, I like the edges, but it's kind of boring. I'm going to go back to brush settings. And see how I want this to actually draw out. We're changing the brush tip, so I'm just going to make that a little bit narrower. You can also change the angle of it by rotating your brush. And I'm keeping an eye on this preview to really just kind of doing it by eye, seeing what I like. Gonna go to Shape Dynamics next. Use the size jitter to just create some character on the edges of the stroke. I don't know. I don't know if I like that one so much. Yeah, we'll leave that on there. And we'll adjust the angle jitter a little bit. And the roundness jitter. I think I'll leave that off. All right. Next we're going to go to scattering. And I want to have this adjust with pen pressure. And I don't want a lot of scattering, just a little bit. I'll leave that at 2. Alright, so if I test this out now, I'm liking that a lot better. As kind of like a spray paint can quality to it. Yeah, and the lighter I go, the less kind of dramatic it is. Okay, and we'll go to transfer. And I'm going to play around with the opacity of this brush. If you're wondering what the difference between opacity and flow is, opacity is about how opaque or transparent the individual marks are. So if you see in this preview, the edges are a lot more transparent. The less pressure you use, the more transparent your marks will be. Flow is about how much medium is actually on your brush. So if you were thinking about it in terms of like real painting, it's about how much paint is on your brush. So if you have a lot of flow, like if this was up towards 100%, you would have more paint on your brush. It would look a lot more wet. If you want to create a brush that's more like watercolor or oil paint, you would want that to be higher. If you wanted a low flow, it would be a lot drier. So if you wanted it to kind of act like a brush that you took most of the paint off and you're just dry brushing on paper, you would want that flow jitter to be a lot lower. I'm going to put it somewhere in the middle and adjust that with pen pressure. So now if I go and paint, I'm using a lot less pressure on the edge here, but it has kind of like a watercolor sort of effect now. And the more pressure I use, the darker it gets. So that's how you can draw your own shapes to create into brushes. So another way you can make brushes in Photoshop is you can import things that you've drawn by hand. So I've made a document. You can open it up. So I have this document where I drew some scribbles that we can turn into brushes. So what I'm going to do is actually select one of these scribbles using the rectangular marquee tool and hit Command C to copy it. And I'm going to bring it over into our canvas here. Hit Command V and enlarge it. You can do this by drawing on a piece of paper and using a scanner to scan it into your computer. But then once you have this drawing in your canvas, you do what we did before. You go to Edit, hit Define Brush Preset. I'm going to call this Scribble 2. And now I have my brush that's shaped like a scribble. So we're going to just clear this. And if I bring this down and just draw with it, it has some interesting texture on the outside, but it looks still kind of like you can see a repeating pattern. So we're just going to adjust the same settings in the brush settings menu to make it look a little bit more randomized. I'm going to squish it just a little bit. Go to Shape Dynamics. Change the size jitter on this. Change the angle jitter. That's kind of cool. And I think I actually want to leave scattering off on this one. But I do want to mess with the transfer a little bit. So let's see. Up that just a little. Also up flow just a little bit. So now if I draw with this pen, it has more of a kind of like charcoal sort of texture. But I like the sort of wispy lines on the end of this. If I make it smaller, let's see. Then it kind of almost looks like an airbrush. All right, so that's 3 ways that you can make brushes in Photoshop. Now, if I wanted to export the brushes that I just made, I would go to the Brushes menu, and I see all my brushes are down here. And you want to make sure that you have an account with something like Dropbox or iCloud, something that you can open up on a tablet later, so you can use it with a mobile app. But we are going to hold down Control, or we're going to hold down Command and click on all of the brushes that we want to export. Then we go to this hamburger menu up in the corner of the brushes palette and hit Export Selected Brushes. And you can name this whole package of brushes something. I'm going to call this Custom Brushes. And I'm actually going to save a copy on the desktop so I can move it to Dropbox later. So once you save that file, you can move it over to either iCloud or Dropbox. And later on in the class, we will use those in Adobe Fresco and Procreate. But for now, I'm going to show you how you can make custom brushes using Adobe Illustrator. It's really similar to what we just did in Photoshop. The difference between making Illustrator brushes versus Photoshop brushes is that Illustrator brushes will be vector brushes, so they won't lose any quality. and you can use them in vector programs like Adobe Illustrator, or Inkscape is a free vector program. So we are going to open up the sort of document with scribbles that I had earlier. So this is a cool way for you to make vector brushes. I'm going to take, let's see, this image and actually crop it by clicking on the crop image. Let me just stretch out this window here. By clicking the crop image tool, and I'm only going to use the scribble I want. Let's try this one down here. And we're going to hit apply. So now I have just this one scribble shape. I'm going to enlarge it a little bit just so you can see. And we're going to trace this image. So in the properties panel, we're going to click image trace, default, and then we're going to hit expand. And now we have a vector of this scribble shape. I'm going to ungroup this and only select, whoops, the background, get rid of that, so that we only have this scribble shape here, and we'll regroup that together. So now that I have this shape, what I'm going to do is open up the brushes menu. That's this brush tool right here. And the properties for brushes are in this panel right here. So if I wanted to create a new brush based on this kind of scribble shape, I would click on it first, open up this brush panel, and hit the hamburger menu that's inside, and then click New Brush. This will give me an option to make either a bunch of different types of brushes. You can do a scatter brush, which will scatter the shape similar to in Photoshop, an art brush that'll let you draw directly with the shape, or a pattern brush that you can use to make borders and kind of decorative frames. I'm going to turn this into a scatter brush, hit OK, and I'm going to name this one Scatter Scribble. And hit OK. So now this new brush appears in my brush menu. Brushes act a little bit different in Adobe Illustrator than they do in Photoshop. What you can do is you can draw a path. So if I was to use this path drawing tool, and make like a path here, I can take this brush and apply it to the path. It's made sort of repeating stamps all along it. Or I can draw directly with the brush tool by hitting escape here. Selecting the brush tool in this toolbar. and painting with the brush directly. Let's try making this a little bit smaller. So you can actually change the size by going up to the stroke menu, or the stroke width. I'll change that to 0.25. And you can draw, making a pattern brush like that. If I was to turn this into an art brush, select this same shape, go to the brushes panel, hamburger menu, new brush, make an art brush instead. Then when I draw directly with it, let's see. Here is our new brush. So if I was to go to the brush tool by hitting B and draw with it, it stretches that shape across whatever stroke I'm making in Illustrator. So this is a cool tool if you want to make different kinds of frames, different sorts of vector shapes or vector patterns. I'm going to make this actually a little bit smaller and see if that changes the effect of it. I'm going to skew it a little bit, make it a little bit smaller. Create another brush. New brush, selecting art brush. And let's see. Hit OK. Hit B for brush. And now if I draw with it, I like that effect a lot better. So those are some ways that you can make custom brushes inside of Adobe Illustrator. So now if you want to take the custom brushes you made and import them into a mobile drawing app like Procreate or Adobe Fresco, we're going to switch over to the iPad that I'm using. So on my iPad, I have Adobe Fresco and Procreate. We're going to start with Adobe Fresco, because that's the easier of the two to import. If I open it up, it should take you to this home screen here. We're going to create a new document, just a square one. And when you import brushes in Fresco, it only turns them into pixel brushes. You can't import custom vector brushes into it. But if I go to the pixel brushes menu and scroll down to the bottom, there's this plus sign. When you hit the plus sign, it gives you an option to discover new brushes or import from files. So we're going to hit import from files. And this takes me directly to my iClouds folder. So if I go to my iCloud drive, if you have Dropbox on your phone or your tablet, you can open up Dropbox as well. And I'm going to click on brushes where I saved my custom brushes file that we made earlier and tap on that to open it. And then once I open it, it will appear in the Pixel Brushes menu. So if I click on Scribble Brush here, that's really small. But you can see that it's created this kind of texture brush that you can use in Adobe Fresco. If you want to import the same brush into Procreate, we're going to open up Procreate. What we're going to do is open up a new file. And open up just one that's screen size. So if I wanted to import brushes into Procreate, it's actually a pretty similar process. You would, in your new document, hit the brushes file, hit plus, and it gives you the option to import. If I hit import, I can go back to my iCloud Drive and click on the custom brushes file that I made. And it will give me this new folder that says custom brushes. So I can select this scribble brush, and even though I imported it, it's not behaving quite the way that I want it to. But the cool thing about Procreate is it has its own sort of like brush editor inside the program. So if I was to go back up here and tap on the brush, we can use these different settings to sort of get it acting the way I want it. Fall off kind of acts like your opacity, and flow settings, and jitter and spacing are still the same. You can also mess with these different settings on the side. So like stabilization. And we'll hit done. And now I can use this brush inside of Procreate as well. So that does it for our class. Those are just a few ways that you can make custom brushes in different drawing programs. If you'd like to try any of these methods out, you can always come to Studio 300 and check out a Wacom tablet and a laptop and make your own brushes in Photoshop or Illustrator to get started and kind of experiment and see what you like making and what you create, and then import it over to your own mobile devices. Thanks so much for taking this YouTube class. If you're interested in any similar programming, you can always go to fountaindale.org/events for more online and in-person classes.